In this video, I'm going to be giving some helpful tips and tricks about how to read a research paper for this course. And for this video, I'm going to be using this paper for week 1 for our class, American Incomes Before and After the Revolution, by Peter Lindert and Jeffrey Williamson, as an example. I'm basically going to be showing you how I go through and read a research paper and hopefully giving you guys a helpful way to think about this. Now, I'm also going to talk a little bit about how specifically to read a research paper for this course and what things you might find helpful. But let's start with the very general. So, as you can see, this paper is 42 pages long. Now, some of those papers are going to be citations, some of them may be tables, so not very many words, but still, research papers are long, and because they're written for an academic audience who are all experts in the field to some degree or another as their primary audience, that means that they can be very difficult for even someone who's received some education in economics to parse exactly what is going on. And for many of you, this may be the first time actually digging into and reading a research paper, this many research papers in this depth. So if you feel lost, if you feel confused, if you feel a little bit out of it, that's okay. It's normal. Part of the point of this course is to expose you to lots of different papers of this type so you get used to reading an academic research paper. So, how do we start? Well, luckily, every research paper that's published in an academic journal starts at a really useful place, with an abstract. An abstract is essentially a 1 to 2 paragraph summary of the paper, and in economics, they tend to be kept very short and very pithy. This right here is the abstract. So let's take a look at it and see what we can find. Building social tables in the tradition of Gregory King, we developed new estimates suggesting that between 1774 and 1800, American incomes fell in real per capita terms. Boom, pithy, to the point. Already we know what is this paper about and what is their main finding. You're going to find at least those two things in the abstract of every reasonable research paper. So we found that they have developed new estimates of American incomes right immediately before and after the American Revolution. And what they find, their results, are that these incomes fell in real per capita terms. So now we have an expectation for we're going to read for the rest of the paper. And then talk a little bit more about their findings. The colonial South was richer than the North at the start, but was already beginning to lose its income lead by 1800. So now we have a little bit more of what we can expect to find in the paper. We also find that free American colonists had much more equal incomes than did households in England and Wales. Colonists had greater purchasing power than their English counterparts. Overall, the income ranks except in the top percent. So this is a very pithy and very short abstract. What else might we find in an abstract? A lot of times, especially for newer research papers, you're going to find a couple of other very interesting and useful things. One, you're going to find their methodology. At some point in the paper, they will probably mention what method or what tool they used to find their results. In this one, we get that a little bit. They say that they developed these new estimates. So if we were familiar with this literature, we would probably know what tools they have. But this one kind of implies it. So those are the three main things that we can usually garner from a paper. What is it about? What was their main methodology that they used? And what was their main result? And now, since we have that in our minds when we're reading through the rest of the paper, we can be able to more easily see how all those things tie together. The next thing that is useful when you're reading a paper is to read the introduction. The introduction is going to be the first section of the paper proper after the abstract, and it's usually devoted to setting up the question, as well as kind of restating. Basically, you can think of this as the first paragraph or the introductory paragraph that you might write in one of your essays. It serves a very similar function. So let's take a look at the introduction for this paper. American economic historians need fresh information on the income levels that prevailed at the end of the colonial era and the dawn of independence in order to understand this country's growth process and its evolving social structure. So right away they tell us, why is this important? This need keeps arising whenever we try to cast back from today to the late colonial period, or to project ahead from early colonial years, or to view American incomes in transatlantic perspective. Now we have a little subsection on early American growth and inequality debates. And here, I'm not going to read this whole thing, but basically they're going to go through the various academic literature on their topic. And this is extremely good for most research papers. They want to relate it to what's come before so that their academic audience can see, hey, we know what we're talking about, and this is why you should care about it. This is why this is important to our academic discussion. This is often important to read, and in this paper, they're going to talk about the various ways that people have measured and looked at American economic growth throughout the years. But then, what's important is towards the end of this introduction, which this introduction is a little long. For many papers, it's not going to be quite as many paragraphs. They spend a good bit amount of time on the related literature. Eventually, they get to a section where they talk about their contributions. Sometimes this is labeled, but sometimes you can kind of find it from context. Here, it starts right here. We can now offer new estimates based on more archival data than were available to earlier researchers. So here, in the contributions section, or the contributions paragraph, the authors are going to tell us, why is our work important? Why do we need to improve on the papers that we were just talking about? In this paper, they also talk about their contribution as being open source, basically that they're providing their data for free for anyone to use. This is a little bit more of an academic thing, but it's cool. And then we're going to get a more detailed paragraph that's going to reinforce what is in the abstract. We're going to again tell us, hey, what are our results? What did we find? So that again, we as the readers are primed. What are they finding? So here they say, our findings confirm some common beliefs about growth and inequality in early America, yet contradict others. So they're saying, hey, we're going to agree with some of this literature that we just mentioned, but we're also going to disagree with a lot of it. This article offers a clearer view of colonial American inequality and how the incomes for different classes compared with those of their counterparts in the mother country. And here we have a couple of sentences kind of reiterating in a little more detail what they talked about in their abstract. So this serves as the introduction to the paper. They talk about why is this question important? What is the other literature related to this question? And what are we doing that's different, and what did we find? So now we have this whole big picture idea of what the rest of the paper is going to be like. Now at this point, you could continue reading through the paper, but it's often very useful to, instead of reading through the rest of the paper chronologically, slogging through it, to jump all the way to their conclusion. So let's do that. I'm going to scroll all the way through the rest of the paper until we reach their conclusion. This is because, again, as I mentioned, papers are often really long. They can really bog you down with a lot of detail. But if you can read the introduction and the abstract and figure out, okay, why is this important, and why should I care, and how does this relate to other literature, and then read their conclusion, sometimes called the summary and agenda as it is in this paper, or the summary or future research or something like that. It's usually the final paragraph and a half or the final section of the paper. Then you can get another kind of big picture overview of what the authors think is important in the paper. And that way, when you go back and read through the rest of the paper, you know what to look for because the authors have already told you what's most important. What are the most important things in our paper? So here they say the only way to push back the quantitative frontiers of inequality in living standard history is to adapt to the data environments of the deep past. In the archaeological extreme, that means accepting skeletal remains and DNA as our main focus of evidence. Even a journey back to the late 18th century must accept an eclectic array of incomplete evidence. One of the most unexplored frontiers for the early modern era is occupational counting, an approach which allows us to assemble aggregate incomes and their distribution among social classes. So here in this sentence, in one sentence, the authors have told us this is our big new thing, right? They mentioned we're going to have new data sources. Here we've been told what those new data sources are. They're looking at occupations and trying to see how many people probably in the various states or cities in the colonies were engaged in various occupations, using that to try and measure income. And now when we go back and read when they actually talk about how this works, we'll know what to expect. Working on that frontier, they continue, we have emerged with a rich harvest dealing with early American growth and inequality. It appears that colonists had higher incomes in 1774 than previously thought. So here again, we are reiterating their results, but there's than previously thought clues us in to how what they found is different from what was previously in the literature. But then they say between 1774 and 1800, American incomes declined in real per capita terms, so that any rapid growth after 1790 failed to make up for a very steep decline during wartime and early independence. In addition, we find that free American colonists had more equal incomes than in households in England and Wales. The colonists also had greater purchasing power than the English counterparts over all of the income ranks, except at the top 1%, although this income advantage was lost in the fight for independence. Regional inequality was also an important feature of the American colonies. Our results suggest that Southern per capita income was far above the averages for other colonies in 1774, and that poor whites were much less common than in other colonies. It appears that the colonial South lacked the large number of poor whites that could be counted in Boston, Philadelphia, New York, and lesser coastal towns. In short, our results suggest that mass poverty did not spread among the Southern white population until the 19th century. Surely the late colonial income distribution of the South needs further research of the sort already done for the Chesapeake. So now we're getting into what future questions could we be thinking about? What future research? And here, as you're reading these papers, maybe make a note of these. Because again, remember, you're going to have to do an annotated bibliography. You can pick one of these questions, or maybe you see a couple of different papers that mention the same sort of idea, and you can say, hey, this seems to be an unexplored area. I want to see what research has been done in this area since these papers have been written. That might be a really cool way to get an idea for a project for this class. In addition, it appears that the South Atlantic underwent a reversal of fortune between 1774 and 1840, dropping from being the richest American region to being the poorest. Why? Again, an unanswered question that we could ask. And then they're going to continue going into future possible research that maybe you could look at and see if someone has done this. So now that we've looked at the abstract of the paper and the introduction and the conclusion, we have this big, broad idea of what the paper is about. And then we can go through and read and see how they explain in the details. We'll always have this big picture idea in our head that will help us understand. And if we're getting lost in those details sometimes, we can say, that's okay. I know what the gist of it is. I don't need to understand the exact details at the moment. I can go on to the next section and keep reading and not get bogged down reading the same paragraph over and over and over again. Because here's the thing. For a lot of these papers, you're going to have to read them twice to really understand. Even for me, for a paper that I really want to understand, and I've read a lot of papers for every single class that I take as a PhD student. If I really, really want to understand a research paper, I need to read it at least twice, usually 3 times. But with this method, you can get the gist of it, kind of get that first inclination. Don't let yourself get too bogged down as you're reading through the details of the paper. Trust yourself that if you have that big picture idea, you'll be able to get the details that are important And then when you go back and read it a second time, the details that you missed will fall right into place. So that's a very general strategy for reading a research paper. But what about specific to this course? Well, luckily for you guys, hopefully, not only do you have the paper itself, but you have an assignment. So if we go to week 1 here, you can see here assignment 1. We open that up. You can see here I have some different questions and things about the paper that I would like you to answer. The first one here regarding this paper, the Lindert and Williamson paper, is to write a summary. So you can do that as you're reading the paper for the first time, making notes, writing kind of what the important things you notice are. But then these next 3 questions, or really these next 2, this third one is a comparison between the 2 papers for week 1. But especially these next 2 basically can tell you, hey, this is what I think is important for you to learn from this paper for this class. And so as you're reading the paper through that first time, go through and have this in another window, or have it on the next monitor, so you can look over and be like, okay, as I'm reading this paper, what data sources do Lindert and Williamson use to draw their conclusions? You can think about that and be prepared and focus on that in the paper. What happened to incomes after the American Revolution? Do you think this was an unintended consequence of American independence? Or was there some sort of trade-off between wealth and income inequality? These are the important questions I want you to be asking as you're reading the paper. So, between looking over the abstract, introduction, and conclusion first to get that big picture idea before you're going through the paper and looking at the details, and focusing in on the details that I highlight in the questions for the week, hopefully that will help you as you're reading these often very thick and detail-oriented papers. So hopefully you'll be able to understand them and learn something from them. All right, the next video for you guys to watch this week is a video on regressions, where I'll go over the basics of what a regression is and how to read it in a paper, because it's going to be one of the main tools that we're going to see throughout a lot of our papers this semester.